misunderstandings about the concept definition of done. Okay, great. We have 4. So Wilton, Jamie, and Rebecca, you can unmute yourself. So common misunderstandings about the concept of definition of done. What are your thoughts?
From my perspective, what I notice that happens frequently is that there is a high tendency of a few team members to have some confusion regarding acceptance criteria versus definition of done, which is completely different, as of course the acceptance criteria should be part of definition of done. Basically, definition of done is kind of an agreement to guarantee that the product increment is going to present the expected quality. So we might consider things, technical things such as unit tests, integration tests, and going through other stuff such as documentation, PO, sign off, or any other dependencies, sign off, and all the things, from my perspective, from my understanding, should be part of definition of done, and having in mind that definition of done is not kind of a unique rule that you have for everything forever. So it should be updated according to your needs based on your product increment and etc. So yeah, in a few words, that's my conception.
Yeah. So in general, I feel that some of the common misunderstandings that I generally see is that the definition of done is a wish list rather than an actual checklist that it's either everything's checked and it's done or it's not done. Like there is no middle ground in there. We cannot be 70% done or 99.9% done, right? We either done or not, and that's why the definition of done is there. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. And I also see another one is misunderstanding that the definition of done is has many different levels, as in, well, our team has this definition of done, but then there is a testing team and they have a definition of done, and all piles up, but the definition of done is on the product level, as you said, increment. Once again, is it done? Is it potentially releasable? Can we show it to the customer? Yes or no? And like those are the misunderstandings that I mostly see. What do you guys think? Yeah.
I used to have a very dumb analogy when I was adolescent. I used to say to my team members that when I was adolescent, I had, as a definition of done, 3 things to be able to go out: my father approval, my mother's approval, and money. If all the things were kind of checked, and then my definition of done was achieved, otherwise I couldn't get outside. So, I mean, there is no partial definition of done, yes or no for everything.
I think one of the misunderstandings around it, at least the one I've experienced, is that not all tasks, not all stories have the same definition of done, because there's a variety of types of works usually involved in a project, in a product development. So sometimes what is defined, the team tries to be generic, or at least the team I work with try to be generic in terms of this is everything that should cover software development tasks. But then when you have tasks that are related to setting up an infrastructure or interacting with the customer to do some more advanced testing and things like that, the same list of criteria for definition of done no longer fit. And how do you juggle with those? So that I find is sometimes one of the things that's challenging in a team, recognizing the different types of work that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
I would like to share a couple of things. A very common misunderstanding what I have seen for DoD is once you've come up with a definition of done, you cannot change it, which is not correct. You should, on the contrary, go back and revisit your definition of done and improve it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And the second thing that uh, I have seen is, or I have not seen is, having definition of done for different things. So you can have a definition of done for a story, for a sprint, for a release, for a project. So you can have multiple definition of dones as well. You should not restrict yourself to a general definition of done.
Hmm.
In
So
what way though? Like, do you mean that the story can be done, but the product not?
yes, so we can have 5 stories done, which would all meet definition of done. But for a release to be done, it would be much more than just a collection of stories. It would have the product owner testing, verifying other stuff on the live environment, or some additional things that might require for the product or the project or the release to go through. So we might have definition of done for a story plus some additional things as part of definition of done for a release.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of, just like anything else, the definition of done is really a topic for a sprint retrospective, because you need to continually be adapting it to your changing products. So, what could be added or changed to the current definition of done to improve quality or process, code reviews, for example, automation, release notes, things like that. But I think most teams come up with a definition of done, and then they never look at it again. I'm not even sure they look at it ever at all. I think they just say, okay, we've got this definition of done, and then they go on about their way, and never really, it's not really in front of the team, right? So there's, so they're releasing almost done product. Oh, this feature works except for this part of it. Well, that's not a MVP, really, right?
Yeah. Is it potentially releasable? What are your favorite liberating structures to use for Scrum ceremonies? In the interest of time, let's just go ahead, Jamie.
All right. I love liberating structures. So some of my favorites, obviously the foundational one is 1, 2 for all. You can use that in lots of places. I would say for retrospectives, she had to change the word. Yeah, for retrospectives, one string I really like is what, so what, now what, when looking back on a previous sprint, and using a 1, 2 for all for each portion of that. So for the what, we divide up into 1, 2 for all to come up with the observations, and then the now what, and the implications, and the so what are we going to do about it, and then the last part of the string would be 15% solution to come up with our action items. So that's one that I really like to use a lot, those 3.
Yeah.
For check-ins, sometimes I like to do a MAD-T, or just yeah, I don't know if that's really a check-in as much as just get everybody, I guess it kind of gets everybody talking, sort of.
I think there is a lot of potential in using liberated structures in sprint review to actually involve the stakeholders much more, because generally stakeholders kind of, first of all, usually don't show up because they don't really find sprint reviews useful. So I feel that there is so much potential in involving them in providing their feedback with liberating structures. I think MAD-T can be very useful in sprint planning. If you really think about the questions and the strings of sentences that you put into the MAD-T, I believe that you can actually get at a good sprint goal using MAD-T as a liberating structure in sprint planning. I think there's a lot of potential with that.
If I can jump in. Sorry, I cut off my video. I have
Go
kids
ahead.
jumping around behind me.
Yeah, that's fine.
What I've used the 1-2 for all in like different variants. I've used 1-2-4, 1-2-7, or something like that, and I find it really good for brainstorming, especially when dealing with a big group of engineers. I don't want to sound mean, but everybody has an opinion and everybody has a lot to say. But surprisingly, I find that this helps put forward everybody's idea and realize, oh, we all have the same ideas already, or very similar ideas. We don't need to debate on them. So I find that very useful. And the other one I've used before is Purpose to Practice. And I used that more for, it wasn't for Scrum events. It was, well, one Scrum event, a Sprint Zero, or for workshops. The Sprint Zero, as in the very first sprints to kick off a project, where we set up who's going to work on it, who's going to participate, and the user story mapping, and what architecture are we starting from, and all of those. I find that the Purpose to Practice Liberating Structure is a good inspiration to make sure that we don't forget anything important. And specifically Purpose to Practice, I think it's purpose, what are the principles that we want to follow, which kind of helps define what are the limits of our purpose, and then who are the participants we should have. Do we have all the stakeholders we need in the room, or is it just us developing, and who else should be there? What structure are we going to have, and then what are the practices that we're going to have? It actually forces the team to rethink how they want to work, as opposed to just assume they'll use Scrum out of the box and it'll work. Like, rethink what will actually work for the situation that we have in front of us. Mm-hmm. That's my experience.
Mm-hmm. I think another good one is Conversation Cafe, and using that one to come up with to generate your data. You know, I think people in smaller groups feel more comfortable talking through, you know, a discussion about the sprint, how things went, instead of the what went well, what didn't go well, what, you know, keep doing, stop doing, you know.
Yeah. I'm also thinking that maybe critical uncertainties, where you create the 4-quadrant model, can help with prioritization and ordering of the backlog. Maybe especially in the sprint planning, where you might face a situation where you don't know which way to go. You cannot take on all of the work. So how can you actually balance it out against each other? And I think critical uncertainties can be an interesting way to use it. Just thought about it now.
Yeah. And one of my favorite that I just thought about now is Triz, actually. So we actually did use that. So, you know, basically the prompt was, what can we do to make sure that we produce a software, develop a software that nobody will want to use?
I've had that too. It's pretty good. How can we make sure we fail? What's the worst case scenario possible?
Yeah, and so that brought up a lot of good discussions.
Yeah, Triz is great at doing that. One thing I just thought of, JB, with sprint planning as well as refinement, maybe min specs would work.
Which is kind of embedded in Purpose to Planning, I think, to some extent, isn't it?
I'm not quite sure. I don't remember. I don't remember the other one, but with min specs, it's okay. What's if we take this out, can we still answer this question or still hit this mark?
Right.
So that might be a good one for planning, assuming your team is interested in doing things like liberating structures.
Yeah,
exactly.
As long as you don't tell them, they won't figure it out.
I agree. Sneak it in.
Don't introduce it as liberating structure. But I think min spec, max spec, min spec is also a very good thing to help figure out what to work on, what is the most important thing to work on maybe next. Okay. I'm just looking at the timer. I know that there's only 5 seconds left.